should I your true love know from another man?
There's like a deep filial piety and reverence to Hamlet in a certain kind of way. I mean, when Hazlitt starts the essay, he says, and I mean, this is a kind of astonishing thing for a very critical critic like Hazlitt to say. He says, we've been so used to this tragedy that we hardly know how to criticize it any more than we should know how to describe our own faces.
But I think that's entirely because we already knew the other version. So it's like when you hear a cover of a song that you love, it's very hard to love the cover version, right? You always think, well, the original was better.
At his head all grass green turf, at his heels a stone. And will he not come again? And will he not come again? No, no, he's gone, and we've cast away mourn, and he never will come again.
Can you tell me the plot of Hamlet?
No. Well, no.
Hamlet. Shakespeare, I know that.
I know there's a ghost and death. That's about it.
Who dies?
Everyone? Question mark.
Based on the fact that there's some death, there's probably like some revenge or something or other. That's about all I got.
Like, I think people read it in high school, and that's all I know.
So there was like a prince, and he had to kill the king because that king killed the other king that was his dad.
So in the beginning of the book, there's a ghost around like the castle or somewhere where Hamlet is living, and it turns out that it's the ghost of the king who was Hamlet's dad, and he's telling Hamlet, or I think it might have been a guard at first, but he tells Hamlet eventually, like, it's your uncle who has killed me, and I think by this point the uncle has taken the throne and might be married to Hamlet's mom.
His father is dead, his mother's remarried, and Hamlet's not happy about it, and everything sort of cascades from that point. Parentheses, Hamlet probably was always a delicate and challenging human.
Hamlet is kind of this emotional, like, emo boy that, like, is trying to figure out what to do and if he should kill his stepfather, who is also his uncle, at the same time. And then he gaslights Ophelia, essentially, until she drowns.
I'm pretty sure has that iconic scene where he's holding the skull and he goes, "To be or not to be? That is the question."
And then there's to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing in them, to sleep, perchance to dream. And there's the rub and all that. And then he kills him, and I don't remember the end.
Oh, and Claudius, whatever his name is Claude, is like, I'm gonna kill Hamlet because he's getting a little bit too much in my business. So he's like, I'm gonna put some poison on my sword, and then when we're dueling, I'm gonna just give him a little scratch, and that poison's gonna seep, and then he's gonna die. But then they like switch rapiers somehow, like it's a classic, whatever. And so then Hamlet has the poison guy, and he goes slash slash slash, he kills Claudius.
Oh, and then there's the guy from, what is it, Finland? I don't know. There's that guy from Finland who wants to like fight them, and then he comes upon the castle and everyone's dead. And he's like, this is sad.
But then at the end, like, everyone dies, and that's Hamlet.
In 1603, a pair of London booksellers, Nicholas Ling and John Trundle, published the first printed edition of The Tragical History of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, by William Shakespeare. Because no manuscript copies of Hamlet survive, this small printed book, known as a quarto, is the earliest surviving text of Shakespeare's play that we have. A play, not as it was performed, but as a material object to be sold to customers who like to read. The little quarto would have been sold to customers from retail bookshops throughout London. To make a profit, Ling and Trundle needed to wholesale as many copies of the 1603 quarto as quickly as they could to their fellow booksellers. As was common for playbooks of the period, the first quarto edition of Hamlet used the play's widespread popularity on the stage as a selling point. The title page advertised that the play had been printed, "as it hath been divers times acted by his Highness's servants in the city of London, as also in the 2 universities of Cambridge and Oxford, and elsewhere." The play in print seems to have been a success. Late in 1604, publisher Ling had another edition of the play printed as a second quarto, or Q2. He ordered his new printer, James Roberts, to copy the format of the 1603 edition as closely as possible, right down to the unusual hanging indent on the title page. But for whatever reason, in this second quarto, Ling changed how he chose to advertise the tragical history of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. He removed the information describing the play as it had previously appeared on the stage, and he replaced it with a new description of the text of the play. Newly imprinted and enlarged to almost as much again as it was, according to the true and perfect copy. And so it was enlarged. The second quarto text of the play was nearly twice as long as the first quarto, and that twice as muchness was a crucial part of Q2's marketing campaign. In other words, the advertising of the second quarto of Hamlet relied on customers knowing about the existence of the previous edition, which was seemingly insufficient by comparison to the new and improved version. What's more, the words of the play changed radically from Q1 to Q2. Characters' names changed too. Speeches moved around. Most strikingly, despite the increased length of the new version of the play, a scene that had appeared in the first quarto was now dropped entirely. Whatever the true and perfect copy of Hamlet was that lay behind the second edition, it was profoundly different from the 1603 edition that had come from Ling's bookshop the year before. 18 years later, a third version of Hamlet appeared as part of Shakespeare's works that had been collected by his friends and fellow actors. Shakespeare had died in 1616, but his friends John Hemmings and Henry Condell worked with publishers to create a printed monument in Shakespeare's honor, a large anthology of plays known as a folio. Finally published in 1623, Mr. William Shakespeare's Comedies, Histories, and Tragedies was advertised with language familiar to those who knew the Hamlet second quarto. The 36 plays in the massive volume were published according to the true original copies. Not only did the folio's title page advertise the play's authenticity, but Shakespeare's fellow actors and sharers went to the considerable trouble of writing a preface, vouching for the authority of the plays contained within the volume. So doing, they advertised the new, bigger book that was offered for sale, and suggested, much like the second edition of Hamlet did, that it was superior to the various quarto offerings that had come before.
But whatever you do, buy. Censure will not drive a trade or make the jack go. And though you be a magistrate of wit and sit on the stage at Blackfriars or the cockpit to arraign plays daily, no, these plays have had their trial already and stood out all appeals, and do now come forth quitted rather by a decree of court than any purchase letters of commendation. It has been a thing, we confess, worthy to be wished, that the author himself had lived to have set forth and overseen his own writings. But, since it hath been ordained otherwise, and he, by death, departed from that right, we pray you do not envy his friends the office of their care and pain to have collected and published them, and so to have published them as where before you were abused, with diverse stolen and surreptitious copies, maimed and deformed by the frauds and stealths of injurious impostors that exposed them. Even those are now offered to your view cured and perfect of their limbs, and all the rest absolute in their numbers, as he conceived them.
As the big volume got reprinted over and over again, the folio texts of Shakespeare became the standard by which his plays were judged for the next 150 years. During that time, Shakespeare went from being only one playwright of many in a large theatrical ecosystem to being considered the foremost English writer in history, the pinnacle on the mountain of canonical literature. And while that was happening, likely during the second half of the 17th century, all the copies of Q1, the first edition of Hamlet printed in 1603, were lost and forgotten. Once the Hamlet that was advertised as being a performance text was gone, the only Hamlet people were left with were the two longer versions that rewarded reading and rereading. Fortunately, that was exactly the sort of readers that would make Shakespeare and Hamlet famous.
Hamlet really would be an example of a Shakespeare play that was, perceived in certain ways as almost antithetical to staging. In one of his essays, William Hazlitt says, very clearly, like, I do not want to see a stage rendition of Shakespeare. As he puts it, we do not like to see our author's plays acted, and least of all Hamlet. There is no play that suffers so much in being transferred to the stage. Hamlet himself seems hardly capable of being acted.
There's a complete transformation after Romanticism, particularly Goethe and the reception of Goethe in England by, and also Schilling, German Romantic scholars, thinkers and writers, and the reception of that in England by Coleridge, by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, reimagines the play as being not a play that needs to fulfill the kind of classical requirements of tragedy, which it certainly doesn't, right? It doesn't all take place in one place. It doesn't have kind of unity to it. It flies all over the place. There's pirates in it, right? There's just all kinds of bizarre things happen. Instead, they begin to see it as almost a kind of character study of Hamlet, and particularly a study of the human mind as it's reflecting on the process of thinking, of what action means, of the existence of God or the lack of the existence of God, right? These kind of questions that preoccupied Goethe and Coleridge create a Hamlet that's a very modern character. And I think this is why ever since we've tended to look to Hamlet as like a perfect embodiment of the modern crisis of, identity, or whatever you want to put in there, of belief, right? He's a sort of existentialist hero, right? He's, for every generation after Romanticism, he kind of fits their sense of themselves.
One clear thread that runs through several different writers is that Shakespeare is in a certain way the kind of ultimate example of a sympathetic, open writer who's egoless, protean, and less interested in the kind of mimesis of self, and more interested in the kind of accessing of characters that are real and psychologically authentic.
I never gave you nothing.
My lord, you know right will you did, and with them such earnest vows of love as would have moved the stoniest breast alive. But now, too true, I find, rich gifts wax poor when givers grow unkind.
I never loved you.
You made me believe you did.
No, that shit's not believed me. Go to a nunnery. Go. Why shouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I am myself indifferent, honest, but I could accuse myself of such crimes it had been better my mother had ne'er borne me. Oh, I am very proud, ambitious, disdainful, with more sins in my beck than I have thoughts to put them in. What should such fellows as I do, crawling between heaven and earth? To a nunnery, go. We are errant knaves all, believe none of us. To a nunnery, go.
Oh, heaven secure him.
Where's thy father?
That through line, kind of goes through all of Romanticism. When Keats comes up with his kind of famous idea of negative capability, he's turning in a letter from talking about Shakespeare to saying that this essential trait for poetic imagination is something that Shakespeare himself embodies really clearly. Each sentence is in some way kind of like embedded in the previous sentence, and like Shakespeare just kind of unwinds a spool of thought rather than kind of artificially linking things together. Everybody links the idea of Romanticism with nature, and there's a kind of way in which that has a very Shakespearean foundation, which is this idea that Coleridge had in particular, that you could look at the first scene of a Shakespeare play, and from that very first scene, you could intuit like the whole unfolding arc of the play.
Stand! Who is that?
'Tis I.
Oh, you come most carefully upon your watch.
And if you meet Marcellus and Horatio, the partners of my watch, bid them make haste.
I will. See, who goes there?
Friends to this ground, and liegemen to the Dane. Oh, farewell, honest soldier, who hath relieved you?
Bernardo hath my place. Give you good night.
Hello, Bernardo.
Say, is Horatio there? Peace of him. Welcome, Horatio. Welcome, good Marcellus.
What, hath this thing appeared again tonight?
I have seen nothing.
Horatio thinks 'tis but our fantasy, and will not let belief take hold of him, touching this dreaded sight twice seen by us. Therefore I've entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of the night, that if again this apparition comes, he may approve our eyes and speak to it. 'Twill not appear.
Sit down, I pray, and let us once again assail your ears that are so fortified what we have 2 nights seen.
Oh, sit we down, and let us hear Bernardo speak of this.
Last night of all, when yonder star that's westward from the pole had made its course to illumine that part of heaven where now it burns, the clock then tolling 1.
Break off your touch, see where it comes again.
In the same figure like the king that's dead.
Thou art a scholar, speak to it, Horatio.
Looks it not like the king?
Most like, it horrors me with fear and wonder.
It would be spoke to.
Question it, Horatio. What art thou that thus usurps the state in which His Majesty of fairy Denmark is sometimes dwelt? By heaven I charge thee, speak. It is offended.
See, it stalks away.
Stay, speak. Speak, by heaven I charge thee, speak. Well, 'tis gone, it makes no answer.
How now, Horatio, you tremble and look pale. Is not this something more than fantasy? What think you on't?
For my God, I might disbelieve without the sensible true vouch of my own eyes.
The first scene would have the germ of all after events, the germ. And I mean that idea of like a kind of seed or a germ that would kind of unfold to make this bigger thing is this huge idea in Romantic aesthetics of organic form, in the sense that something isn't kind of mechanically produced over time, but it kind of just is what it is, and it just naturally grows and unfolds. So I mean, for a lot of Romantic writers, I mean, Shakespeare is like the original organic form guy. He just didn't know it, or didn't have the vocabulary to think of himself as such.
Stand! Who is that?
Okay, so it's 1823, and Henry Bunbury, who is a minor country gentleman with a nice little manor house, has recently inherited this house from his father. And this is my guess, I think he's inventorying his new possessions, and he's going through his library. And he finds in the library, or perhaps in a small closet in the library, he changes his story on this at different moments. He finds a small, what he describes as a small quarto, barbarously cropped and very ill bound. So this is a decaying old book, very common sight in his library and in the library of any country estate in England at this time. And in this book are 12 Shakespeare plays. Now, how had it managed to be in this library, in this family for so long, where apparently no one noticed that this was a text of Hamlet that no one had seen in 200 years? So apparently no one had noticed until Bunbury had a look through it and realized he was looking at a completely different text. He then took this book to the London booksellers Payne and Foss, who both published new books and dealt in rare books. The rare book trade was just getting going around this time. And he traded it to them for books that were valued at about 180 pounds. They turned around and sold it almost immediately to the Duke of Devonshire, who was the greatest aristocratic book collector in England at the time, for a good bit more, right? So Bunbury seems not to have really valued the book as highly as he should have. And in the meantime, they produced a reprint edition of the Hamlet. And that came out in 1825. And until then, a couple of years after Bunbury found it, no one really had been able to read the text because it only existed in this one copy. And the Duke of Devonshire, Payne and Foss were not about to let just anyone see it. So they produced a reprint text in 1825 that was really when the text of Q1 Hamlet became disseminated to the broader public, and when newspaper articles, actors and theater producers, editors, and literary critics began to grapple with this text.
And just a few decades later, another copy of the first quarto was discovered. Now the Shakespeare industry, reveling in romantic bardolatry, had a problem. There was this other, earlier Hamlet, and many people did not like it. It did not seem right. It needed to be explained away.
Oh, most unlooked for time, unhappy country.
How quickly that settled down into basically two opposing camps that dominate, and still, you could argue, are the dominant views. Either this was, Q1 represented Shakespeare's rough draft of the play, or Q1 represented someone's attempt to take down a performance of the play in shorthand. And the play that was being performed comes to be understood as basically the version that's in the folio and the second quarto of Hamlet. So either we have a rough draft, or we have just a bad version of the familiar play. And once those two options become articulated by two of the great editors of the period, it's almost like nothing else can be said for about 80 years. This was a kind of class argument that Shakespeare was a writer who we can see painfully laboring over his text, and like a hard worker, revising and revising and revising until he gets it right.
The idea that Q1 Hamlet was an earlier draft gives us a Shakespeare as a working poet, someone who worked at it. But for Romantics, this theory was easy to reject because, as Hemmings and Condell had written in To the Great Variety of Readers,
his mind and hand went together, and what he thought he uttered with that easiness that we have scarce received from him a blot in his papers.
No. Shakespeare couldn't be a reviser, surely. We saw his papers.
The champion of the shorthand theory, John Payne Collier, who had a view of Shakespeare coming again out of the Romantic movement and Romantic ideas of literary creation, which stressed the kind of all-at-once character of poetic genius, that Hamlet came to Shakespeare in a burst of inspiration. It came kind of wholly formed, bursting from his head, right? And he wrote it down once, and there was no need for painful revision, which is kind of something that's beneath Shakespeare's genius, right? Collier, who came up with this theory, was himself a very accomplished shorthand writer. His father had done shorthand work in the Houses of Parliament, taking down speeches, and had taught him shorthand. So that's why he thought of it. Later, the dominant form is that this is actors trying to remember the play and writing it down, but it's a version of the same story, right? Collier sets this all in motion.
Collier's theory suggested that a text closer to Q2 had really come first, and that this longer version was closer to Shakespeare's real version of Hamlet that had always been performed. In this theory, Q1 was somehow copied by nefarious agents, like actors who performed the play in the theater, or prompters who copied the playbook, or duplicitous audience members using shorthand. Some of these theories were invariably influenced by Samuel Taylor Coleridge's famous lectures on Shakespeare, which had been transmitted to readers just this way, by John Payne Collier.
And I think Coleridge gave, several different series of lectures on Shakespeare over time. We have none of the lectures in manuscript, likely because there never was one. And so, we kind of assemble Coleridge on Shakespeare through shorthand accounts from lectures, Coleridge's own notes, newspaper reports, and just kind of like bits and pieces from diaries and letters. And Collier's shorthand accounts are like the most substantive evocation of his lectures on Shakespeare that we have. And they're, themselves faulty in different kinds of ways. I mean, they're not even a perfect encapsulation of the lecture, but yeah, the best we have to go on.
And Collier's theory of Q1 as a reported or memorially reconstructed text became the dominant explanation for almost 2 centuries, saving the reputation of Shakespeare the genius, who wrote without a blot in his papers. But some folks weren't convinced.
You cannot get to Q1 Hamlet by looking at Q2 Hamlet. It's like trying to extract an egg yolk from an omelet. It ain't gonna happen. That what I had to learn to do and what everyone else had to learn to do was to question the arguments that people had given and go back and look at the evidence that they had offered for things like this memorial reconstruction idea.
I think the opportunity for an audience to get a chance to experience the sort of layers of revision is really rare. And we can get after it in the classroom to a certain extent by like reading bits and pieces of text alongside of each other and saying like, now imagine, if you will, what this is like. But to actually do it on stage in front of an audience, to let them experience the different drafts and fragments and see how, like, even like through repetition, which is satisfying anyway, but to sort of see what changes over time, even if they look really small, like just inverting a word can change everything.
In the first quarto, he says pernicious villain, and in a way it almost reads as if he's talking about the king, whereas in the other versions he says pernicious woman before saying villain, villain, villain. To me, that sets up the relationship and how he feels or what he understands his mother's role to be in the murder of his father differently.
The differences are systematic. The differences are purposeful. The differences are Shakespearean.
What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. In Romeo and Juliet, Juliet says that names are unimportant. But in the 3 texts of Hamlet, names are important. So important, in fact, that the difference in characters' names can demolish the theory that Q1 is just a reported text of Q2. In all the texts of Hamlet, there is a bumbling old counselor to the king, who is stabbed behind a curtain. He is Ophelia and Laertes' father and a spy master. Most audiences of Hamlet know him as Polonius. But in Q1 Hamlet, his name is not Polonius. It is Corambis. The name Corambis neither sounds nor looks like Polonius. It's difficult to believe that the agent who created Q1 by memorizing a manuscript or overhearing the play could have made such a mistake.
Polonius gets killed. Or Corambis. What's the name in this one? I forget. I always forget.
What's more, the counselor employs another spy to observe his son away in France. And this name also changes in ways that could not have resulted from mishearing. In the longer versions of Hamlet, this other spy's name is Reynaldo, but in Q1 he is Montano. In Q1, the name is so important that Shakespeare makes Corambis say it so frequently that anyone taking notes during a performance of Hamlet could not possibly mishear it.
Montano, here, these letters to my son, and this same money with my blessing to him, but imply his learning, good Montano.
I will, my lord.
You should do very well, Montano, to say thus, I knew the gentleman, or know his father, to inquire the manner of his life as thus. Being amongst his acquaintances, you may say you saw him at such a time, marking me, a game, or drinking, swearing, drabbing. You may go so far.
My lord, that will impeach his reputation.
I'faith, not a whit. No, not a whit. Now, happily he closeth with you in the consequence, as you may bridle it, not disparage him a jot. What was I about to say?
He closeth with him in the consequence.
Aye, you say right. He closeth with him thus. This will he say. Let me see what he will say. Right, this. Saw him yesterday, or t'other day, or then, or at such time. A dicing, or at tennis, aye, or drinking drunk, or entering a house of lightness, videlicet brothel. Thus, sir, do we that know the world, being men of reach, by indirections find directions forth. And so shall you, my son. You happy? Are you not?
I have, my lord.
Well, fare you well. Commend me to him.
I will, my lord.
Bid imply his music.
My lord, I will.
The bumbling counselor seems to have started in Q1 as Corambis, and Shakespeare changed his name to Polonius as he revised the first quarto.
The name Corambis, I believe, was chosen or coined because of its connection to the motto of the Cecil family. Lord Burleigh, William Cecil, his motto was Cor unum via una, one heart, one way. Corambis becomes two hearts, two ways. So it's kind of a jibe at the Cecil family and their motto. And of course, people have long talked about, over 100 years, people have been talking about the possibility that Polonius was a lampooning figure of the bumbling counsellor, for which Lord Burleigh was kind of a bit of a stereotype. I think the key thing that happens is that in 1598, William Cecil dies. Robert Cecil pretty much takes over his role for the first year or so, for the last year and a bit of his life. Somewhere around 1597, Robert pretty much takes over the Cecil estate and the management of the role of the Lord Secretary, not Lord Secretary, Lord Treasurer. And so Robert is a really nasty piece of work. You don't want to get on the wrong side of Robert Cecil. Whereas I think there's a sense that William had a bit more of a sense of humour. If you want to give somebody the name of the bumbling counsellor, why not use the most bumbling counsellor present in England, William Cecil, as your figure to lampoon, take his motto, rename it, rebadge it slightly, and you get Corambis. And then for the better part of 10 years, I think there's a Hamlet in circulation and being performed with Corambis as the counsellor. But then, when Robert Cecil takes over his father's job, he's not likely to look very kindly upon a play that's taking the mickey out of his family. So I'm not sure is taking the mickey a phrase you're familiar with. Yeah, good.
Costly thy apparel, as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fashion. The apparel oft proclaims the man. And they of France, the chief rank and station are of a most select and general chief in that. This above all, to thine own self be true. And it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to anyone. Farewell, my blessing with thee.
And so even though there are no official records of any kind of sanction against the players to make this change, it would seem a perfectly opportune moment to say, you know what, we should probably stop using the word Corambis and all these heart jokes. So let's change it to, who's another bumbling counsellor? Oh, there's this guy from Poland who's currently in England in the late 1590s, about whom a book called The Counsellor was written, in which he's described as trying way too hard to use diplomacy for gain and constantly stuffing it up.
Now, to my lord, touching the young Prince Hamlet, certain it is that he is mad. Mad, let us grant him. Now, to know the cause of this effect, or else to say the cause of this defect, for this effect defective comes by cause.
Could my lord be brief?
Madam, I will. My lord, I have a daughter. Well, she's mine. For that we think is surest we often lose. Now, to the prince, my lord, note this letter, the which my daughter in obedience delivered to my hands.
Read it, my lord.
Mark, my lord, doubt that in earth is fire, doubt that the stars do move, doubt truth to be a liar, but do not doubt I love to the beautiful Ophelia, thine ever, the most unhappy Prince Hamlet. My lord, what do you think of me? What might you think when I saw this?
As of a true friend and a most loving subject.
I would be glad to prove this. Now, when I saw this letter, thus I bespake my maiden, Lord Hamlet is a prince out of your star, and one that is unequal for your love. Therefore I did command her refuse his letters, deny his tokens, and to absent herself. She, as my child, obediently obeyed me. Now, since which time, seeing his love thus crossed, which I took to be idle, but sport, he straightway grew into a melancholy, from that unto a fast, then unto a distraction, then into a sadness, from that unto a madness, and so by continuance and weakness of the brain into this frenzy which now possesseth him. And if this be not true, take this from this.
Think you 'tis so?
How so, my lord? I would very fain know that thing that I have said 'tis so positively, and it hath fallen out otherwise. Nay, circumstances lead me on, I'll find it if it were hid as deep as the centre of the earth.
And so that seems to be a perfect opportunity to say, you know what, we'll change Corambis and the obvious family reference to the Cecils and make it this Polish guy and call it Polonius. And that's what I think happens at that moment in time. Of course, we have no specific documentary evidence of any of this, except the plays themselves and how we interpret what appears to be a moment of transition from one version to another.
I think the far and away the most famous speech in Shakespeare is To Be or Not to Be.
To be or not to be.
But what comes next? That is the famous question that lies at the heart of the matter of Shakespeare's three texts of Hamlet.
I think it's a speech that people know at least the first line, maybe some other lines from it, even if they've never read the play or seen the play. There's a lot of speeches like that or lines like that in Shakespeare, but I don't think anything quite reaches the level of familiarity.
There's to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing in them, to sleep, perchance to dream. And there's the rub and all that.
Right. Do you think is there a reason for this?
Oh, it's yes. It just means yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, like think of.
I was just thinking if there's like a deeper reason that he says I all instead of something else.
No, it's the same way that that I say yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But I is just more legible in Elizabethan English.
Yeah. Okay, so that changes the whole first line then.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, there's the point, rather than that is the question. Okay.
Yeah, and yes, that's the point, or it's like an exclamation of discovery.
Yeah.
Almost like,
okay.
So it's a cross between yes and aha.
In a sense, we never can read Q1 Hamlet for the first time, right? It's, even if you haven't read Hamlet in any form, and you, in some bizarre way, you come to read Q1 Hamlet as the first time you read any text of Hamlet. Nonetheless, we all have so much knowledge, even if we don't realize we have it, background, cultural knowledge of the play Hamlet. We know lines from it before we've read it or seen it. That it's Q1 Hamlet is almost impossible to encounter for the first time, right? It's a play that comes to us pre-read and pre-understood.
Get thee to a nunnery, farewell. Or if thou wilt needs marry, marry a fool. For wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them. To a nunnery, go, and quickly too. Farewell.
The heavenly powers restore him.
I have heard of your paintings well enough. God hath given you one face, and you make yourselves another. You jig and amble, and you lisp. You nickname God's creatures, and make your wantonness ignorance. Go to! I'll have no more on it. It hath made me mad. I say we shall have no more marriage. Those that are married already, all but one shall live. The rest shall keep as they are. To a nunnery. Go.
Oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown. The courtiers, soldiers, scholars, eye, tongue, sword, the expectation and rose of the fair state, the glass of fashion and the mold of form, the observed of all observers, quite down. And I, of ladies most deject and wretched, that sucked the honey of his musicked vows. Now, see what noble and most sovereign reason, like sweet bells jangled out of time, and harsh, that unmatched form and stature of blown youth blasted with ecstasy. Oh, woe is me, to have seen what I have seen, see what I see.
That there is nothing any production of Hamlet can do that will destroy the cultural capital of Hamlet. You can't do that in one production. So therefore, you have, in some ways, the ultimate freedom the other way of doing whatever you want. I was in a production of Hamlet that was sort of the director's raison d'etre. And so one of the big things he did is he cut off to be or not to be. He said, to be or not to be, that is the question. Soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph and thy orisons. And every night there was this gasp in the audience, like, what happened to the speech? I need the speech, or it's not Hamlet.
To be or not to be. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep no more. And by asleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action.
One of the things that we have heard a scholar say who came to visit my class is that while to be or not to be, that is the question, that version in Q2 and F is a very fine sort of set piece, right? Mm-hmm. Set speech. Everybody knows what it is. You can compare the ways that different Hamlets choose to do it and get a sense. It's like of how they would, of their whole Hamlet through that speech. But it's also very formal, and it's a precise piece of poetry, very cultivated in Q2. Q1 is a bit more free-flowing, and what this scholar argued is that it actually, there's more for an actor to do in the Q1 version because there's more emotion to find.
Syntactically, a little bit difficult to understand and a little bit muddled. And some of the logic in the speech is tricky to figure out. When Hamlet says, who would this endure but for a hope of something after death, which makes perfect sense. Why would you suffer in the world unless you hope you're going to heaven, which you won't do if you commit suicide? But it stops making quite as easy sense when he says, who would this endure but for a hope of something after death, which puzzles the brain and doth confound the sense? Well, how does the hope of heaven puzzle the brain and confound the sense? You can make sense of that, though it's a little tricky, but you could say, well, it's the fear of the other possible outcome of going to hell and the unknown tortures of hell that puzzle the brain or something. But you have to do a little work to make that make sense when you're reading it, I think. And critics have done that work. Editors have done that work. I think in performance, those kind of little hiccups in syntax and meaning are less likely to be noticed by an audience. And the general gist of the speech is quite clear. Hamlet's thinking about death, heaven, and hell, and the relation of suicide to that outcome. That will be very clear to an audience, and the minor difficulties will be passed over, just as they are in the rest of the play, right? Where the language can be quite complex.
That's the immediacy of why drama works, of why conversation works. It's the establishment of a crafted, artificed moment of human interaction.
There's more within some of the punctuation in which you see an opportunity for a change is available to you here, because there's less concerned about the formal patterns of the poems that seem to bake into the more traditional speech. So that's the larger take that I'd like you to explore a little bit, the way that Hamlet is thinking through different ideas in a kind of stream of conscious way rather than he's got everything figured out. And he makes this speech a lot, which is the way that we tend to associate Hamlet's to be or not to be speech, but that's a different version, whereas this one has kind of a looser, more naturalized quality to it,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. So this one, I'm really finding all this stuff naturally. I mean, more. I guess in both ways, I'd be finding it naturally. But this one's really like free flowing. To be or not to be. There's the point. To die. To sleep. Is that all? All. Nay. To sleep. To dream. Mary, there it goes. For in that dream of death, when we awake and born before an everlasting judge, from whence no passenger ever returned, the undiscovered country, at whose sight the happy smile and the accursed damned. But for this, the joyful hope of this, who'd bear the scorns and flattery of the world, scorned by the right rich, the rich cursed of the poor, the widow being oppressed, the orphan wronged, the taste of hunger or a tyrant's reign, and 1,000 more calamities besides, to grunt and sweat under this weary life, when that he may his full quietus make with the bare bodkin. Who would this endure, but for a hope of something after death, which puzzles the brain and doth confound the sense, which makes us rather bear those evils we have than fly to others that we know not of. Aye. That. This conscience makes cowards of us all.
What wilt thou do? Thou wilt not murder me! Help! Oh!
Help for the queen! I a rat, dead for a ducat. Oh, rash intruding fool! Farewell. I took thee for thy better. Oh, save me! Save me, your gracious powers above, and hover over me with your celestial wings. Do you not come, your tardy son, to chide, that I thus long have let revenge slip by? It is enough. Mother, good night. Come, sir. I'll provide for you a grave who was in life a foolish, prating knave.
Oh! See where the young Ophelia is.
How should I your true love know from another man? By his cockle hat and his staff and his sandal shoon.
Come, Laertes, you dally with me. I pray you, pass with your most cunning play.
I say you so? Have at you, I'll hit you now, my lord. And yet it goes almost against my conscience.
Come on, sir.
Look to the queen!
Oh, the drink! The drink, Hamlet! The drink!
Stage directions explicitly define a necessarily performed action in a play. These actions can range from entrances and exits, to sword fights, to deaths. And in printed play texts, they appear in italics in order to differentiate the action from the dialogue. Though the differences in the stage directions between the three texts of Hamlet may appear minor, they make Q1 Hamlet a fundamentally different play than Q2 or F, because stage directions determine the actions that actors and actors' bodies perform.
Bodies
signify on the stage. And it's important when we're staging a play to always be think about how those bodies signify. And I think, without doing too much intentionality for Shakespeare, he had to have been aware of that, right?
Horatio, but mark yon waterfly, the court knows him, but he knows not the court.
Now God save thee, sweet Prince Hamlet.
And you, sir. Foh, how the muscat smells.
I come with an embassage from his majesty to you.
Oh, I shall, sir, give you attention. By my troth, methinks 'tis very cold.
It is indeed very rash cold.
'Tis hot, methinks.
Very sweltering hot. The king, sweet prince, hath laid a wager on your side. 6 Barbary horse against 6 French rapier, with all their accoutrements too, the carriages. In good faith, they are very curiously wrought.
The carriages, sir. I do not know what you mean.
He had to have been thoughtful about, how the changing body of Burbage, if he's revising, or just even Burbage's different roles throughout, both of their careers, really communicated potentially differently on the stage. The theater is an embodied medium. I think it's one of those things that nowadays we have to be very thoughtful about how we are presenting certain characters, how we are casting plays, what our casting says about different roles and relationships and dynamics, because we as audience always see the embodied actor, and that indicates silently a lot about the character that occurs that we cannot ignore.
Of the stage directions that are unique to Q1, the one with the greatest impact on the play occurs when the ghost of Hamlet's father appears in the Queen's chambers. The Q2 and F stage versions don't give any details of the ghost costume, but the Q1 stage direction reads, "Enter ghost in his nightgown." Before the rediscovery of Q1, stage performances of the ghost had costumed him in the same armor he had worn in the opening scene of the play, a reminder of the ghost's military prowess.
When the ghost appears, we have a very unique stage direction in Q1. The ghost appears in his nightgown. Of course, that's used in conflated texts all the time because it's considered a really valuable piece of information. Costuming, for example. But it also says something deeper about the way we're looking at this bedroom scene. He doesn't come to the Queen with his beaver up or his armor on. He comes in there in a nightgown.
But when costumed in a nightgown, the ghost's body offers a different picture, turning the political tragedy into a domestic one. With the ghost not in armor but in his nightgown, the scene is inherently more intimate. The ghost is vulnerable, about to go to bed with his queen. It is this intimacy that Hamlet responds to in his conversation with his mother.
Whose heart went hand in hand, even with that vow he made to you in marriage. And he is dead. Murdered! Damnably murdered! This was your husband. Look you now, here is your husband, with a face like Vulcan, a look fit for a murder and a rape, a dull, dead, hanging look and a hell-bred eye, to fright children with and amaze the world. And this same you have left to change with this? What devil dost have cozened you with hobman blind? Ah! Have you eyes, and can you look on him that slew my father and your dear husband, to live in the incestuous pleasure of his bed?
Hamlet, speak no more.
To change a monarch's mind to a king of clout of very shreds?
Hamlet, cease.
Nay, but still to persist and dwell in sin, to live, to sweat under the yoke of infamy, to make increase of shame, to seal damnation.
Hamlet, no more!
Why, appetite within you is in the wane. Your blood runs backward now from whence it came. Who'll chide hot blood within a virgin's heart, when lust shall dwell within a matron's breast?
Hamlet, thou cleaves my heart in twain.
I'll throw away the worser part of it and keep the better. Oh, save me. Save me, gracious powers above, and hover over me with your celestial wings. Have you not come your tardy son to chide, that I thus long have let your revenge slip by? Do not glare with looks so pitiful, lest that my heart of stone yield to compassion, and every part that should assist revenge forego their proper powers and fall to pity.
Hamlet, I once again appear to thee to put thee in remembrance of my death. Do not neglect nor long time put it off. But I perceive by thy distracted looks thy mother's fearful, and she stands amazed. Speak to her, Hamlet, for her sex is weak. Comfort thy mother, Hamlet. Think on me.
How is't with you, lady?
Nay, how is't with you, that thus you bend your eyes on vacancy and hold discourse with nothing but with air?
Why, do nothing hear?
Not I.
Do nothing see?
No, neither.
No. I see the king, my father as he lived, in his habit. Look how pale he looks. See how he steals away out of the portal. Look, there he goes.
Alas, it is the weakness of thy brain that makes thy tongue to blaze in thy heart's grief.
I think that's some of the choice there, right? That it becomes about, a sense of theatricality, that the performers have the moment and the choice and the ability to do what they want to do at that moment. You could still sort of take the Q1 text and have a domineering Hamlet and a very, demure Ophelia. I think that's still potentially there. But you also have the chance to not do that. Whereas Q2 tends to direct our attentions more. It tends to invest a lot more of our focus and thoughts onto Hamlet himself.
The text of Q1 Hamlet also offers a curious addition to Ophelia's entrance after she has seemingly lost her mind following the death of her father. Neither the Q2 nor folio texts are specific in the steps that the actor playing Ophelia must take in order to demonstrate her madness, but the Q1 stage direction indicates that she enters playing on a lute and her hair down, singing.
But this mischance of old Corambis' death hath pierced so the young Ophelia's heart that she, poor maid, is quite bereft her wits.
Alas, dear heart. And on the other side, we understand her brothers come from France, and he hath half the heart of all our land, and hardly he'll forget his father's death, unless by some means he be pacified.
Oh, see where the young Ophelia is.
How should I your true love know from another man? By his cockle hat and his staff and his sandal shoon, white as shroud as mountain snow, loaded with sweet flowers, that bewept to the grave did not go with true lovers' showers. He is dead and gone, lady, he is dead and gone. At his head a grass green turf, at his heels a stone.
How is't with you, sweet Ophelia?
Well, God yield you. It grieves me to see how they laid him in the cold ground. I could not choose but weep. And will he not come again? And will he not come again? No, no, he's gone, and we cast away moan, and he never will come again. His beard as white as snow, all flaxen was his poll. He is dead, he is gone, and we cast away moan. God have mercy on his soul. And all Christian souls, I pray God. God be with you, ladies. God be with you.
when you direct something like Q2F Hamlet, typical Hamlet, there's a lot of cultural expectation about particular moments, particular scenes that you're sort of obligated to. Yes, yeah, right. You know, there's those particular sort of images that audiences want to hear, want to encounter, or they don't think it's Hamlet, right? And so therefore getting to do a text like any bad text, any Q1 text, any text that is different than already, you know, always opens up a sense of, you know, they don't know what they're gonna get. And so therefore you can really, you know, play around with.
Meanwhile, be patient and content yourself.
Who's this? Ophelia? Oh, my dear sister. Is it possible a young maid's life should be as mortal as an old man's saw? Oh, heavens themselves, how now, Ophelia?
Well, God of mercy, I have been gathering of flowers. Here is rue for you. You may call it over grace on Sundays. Here's some for me, too. You must wear your rue with a difference. There's a daisy. Here, love, there's rosemary for you, for remembrance. I pray, love, remember. And there's pansy for thoughts.
Documents in madness, thoughts, remembrance? Oh, God. Oh, God.
There's fennel for you. I would have given you some violets, but they all withered when my father died. Alas, they say the owl was a baker's daughter. We see what we are, but cannot tell what we shall be. For bonny sweet Robin is all my joy.
Afflictions, torments, worse than hell.
Nay, love, I pray you make no words of this now. I pray now you shall sing, adown, and you, adowna. 'Tis the king's daughter and the false steward, and if anybody asks you of anything, say you this. Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morning betime, and a maid at your window to be your Valentine. The young man rose and donned his clothes, and took the chamber door, letting the maid that outer maid never departed more. Nay, I pray mark now. By Tess and by Sir Charity, away at thy for shame. Young men will do it when they come to it, by cock they are to blame. Quoth she, before you tumbled me, you promised me to wed. So would I had done by under sun, if thou hadst not come to my bed. So God be with you all. God be with you, ladies. God be with you, love.
For playwrights, props and costumes are precision tools that can evoke more emotion from an audience. Scholars have argued that Ophelia's lute signals her as an educated, accomplished young woman, whose madness is all the more tragic for her lost potential. Among the many differences in characterization in Q1 that are too systematic to be merely failures of memory on the part of a reporter, the first quarto offers a Queen of Denmark who is uniquely defined by her interactions with both Hamlet and Ophelia.
What is the relationship between Gertrude and Ophelia? How old is Ophelia? How can she be played?
I think in thinking about the Q1 version of the speech about Ophelia and the Q2 version of the speech about Ophelia, there are definitely some really distinct differences, right? So the Q2 version is much longer, and I keep wanting to say flowerier, which seems sort of on the nose since there's all that talk about flowers within the speech. There is a willow, grows askant the brook, that shows his hoary leaves in the glassy stream. Therewith fantastic garlands did she make of crowflowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples that liberal shepherds give a grosser name, but our cull-cold maids do dead men's fingers call them. There, on the pendant boughs, her crownet weeds clamoring to hang, an envious sliver broke, when down her weedy trophies and herself fell in the weeping brook. Her clothes spread wide, and mermaid-like a while they bore her up, which time she chanted snatches of old lauds, as one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and endued unto that element. But long it could not be, till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death. But the Q2 speech, I think, feels much more poetic and much more like the queen is painting these beautiful word pictures, right? And sort of beautifying Ophelia's death, talking about all these specific flowers that she used, and really kind of spinning this long tale and picture about Ophelia. Whereas the Q1 version is much more direct and to the point and does not have nearly as much decorative language in it. Oh, my lord, the young Ophelia, having made a garland of sundry sorts of flowers, sitting on a willow by a brook, the envious sprig broke. Into the brook she fell, and for a while her clothes, spread wide abroad, bore the young lady up, and there she sat, smiling, even mermaid-like, twixt heaven and earth, chanting old sundry tunes, uncapable as it were of her distress. But long it could not be, till that her clothes, being heavy with their drink, dragged the sweet wretch to death. And one of the big things that I found and started thinking about with the Q1 version is that I think in the Q1 version, or in Q1 in general, the queen, like I said, is much closer to Hamlet and has a much clearer, close relationship with Hamlet. And so in the Q1 version, because it is so much more direct, so much shorter, and so much almost more horrified, I started thinking a lot about how much the queen is probably thinking that this is where her son could end up, right? That she's seen this young woman die in a brook, and that it's very possible that her son could meet a similar death. So the Q1 speech to me felt much more visceral, and much more like it was coming from a place of horror and sadness and fear for her own son, who she loves and is trying to help.
And there's a relationship here. Gertrude has not had another child. She doesn't have a daughter, and then she has a daughter, or she has the potential of having a daughter pretty soon. Doesn't that tell us a lot? We also have a giveaway scene in the bedroom scene with Hamlet and his mother. They're very different in Q1 as opposed to Q2 and F. Hamlet comes to his mother like a college boy would come to see his mother if he's really upset with her. In Q2 and F, it's Hamlet as an older man, as a grown man. His sexuality and his violence is really on display in that scene. Whereas in the teenage Hamlet, it's more of the angry a teenager obsessed with his mother's behavior and sexuality, but also definitely not a man.
If ever you did my dear father love, forbear the adulterous bed tonight. In time, it may be, you will loathe him quite. And mother, but assist me in revenge, and in his death your infamy shall die.
Hamlet, I vow by that majesty that knows our thoughts and looks into our hearts, I will conceal, consent, and do my best what stratagem soe'er thou shalt devise.
It is enough. Mother, good night.
Critics have long questioned the Queen's allegiance. But where there can be some debate among the Q2 and F versions about the Queen's role in her husband's death, in Q1 the matter is settled. She is innocent, and she clearly vows to help her son in his revenge.
Her relationship with Hamlet and how much she knows and how much she explicitly, even though she's very stifled, I think, in Q1, she explicitly says in Q1, right, in the closet scene, essentially, even though I don't believe you're seeing these ghosts, I do believe you that your dad was murdered, that my husband murdered him, and I'll do whatever you want to help you get revenge. So I think that is a huge difference, and in a lot of ways makes the Q1 queen like less subtle. Like there aren't as many kind of questioning, there are some questioning intricacies, right? Things that you can play with as the actor, but they're different.
Q1 also has a scene between the Queen and Horatio that does not appear in the other two versions of Hamlet. Only in Q1, this scene makes it explicitly clear that the Queen is a subtle political agent, and she is on Hamlet's side.
Madam, your son is safe arrived in Denmark. This letter I even now received of him, wherein he writes how he escaped the danger and subtle treason that the king had plotted. Being crossed by the contention of the winds, he found the packet sent to the King of England, where he saw himself betrayed to death. As at his next conversion with your grace, he will relate the circumstance full.
Oh, then I perceive there's treason in his looks that seem to sugar o'er his villainy. But I will soothe and please him for a time, for murderous minds are always jealous. But know not you, Horatio, where he is?
Yes, madam, and he hath appointed me to meet him on the east side of the city tomorrow morning.
Oh, fail not, good Horatio. Bid him a while be wary of his presence, lest that he fail in that he goes about.
Madam, never make doubt of that. I think by this the news be come to court. He is arrived. Observe the king, and you shall quickly find, Hamlet being here, things fell not to his mind.
But what become of Gilderstone and Rosencraft?
He being set ashore, they went for England, and in the packet they writ down that doom to be performed on them pointed for him. And by great chance he had his father's seal, so all was done without discovery.
Oh, thanks be to heaven for blessing of the prince. Horatio, once again I take my leave with 1,000 mothers' blessings to my son.
Madam, adieu.
You don't have the question of, to me, you don't have the question in Q1 of, is the queen maybe secretly villainous in working with Claudius or working with the king? Is she secretly also against Hamlet? No, I think in Q1, she is on Hamlet's side, both between that scene, the closet scene, and then the scene that she has with Horatio, which just isn't in Q2 in the folio, right? That she is on Hamlet's side. She's rooting for him.
The queen has agency in Q1 that I don't see happening in Q2 or F. And if we link scene 14 to the last scene in the play, the death of the queen, we see her instantly saying, "It's the drink, Hamlet." It's not a surprise that she's suddenly not feeling good. It's not a surprise. Her alarm bells are all going off. She's incredibly sensitive to whatever the king is doing, whatever the king is up to. She's already there. She's watching her son, so she's protective of her son.
Give them the foils. I'll be your foil, Laertes. These foils have all the length. Come on, sir. A hit.
No, none.
Judgment.
A hit, a most palpable hit.
Well, come again.
Another. Judgment.
I grant a touch.
Here, Hamlet, the king doth drink a health to thee.
Here, Hamlet, take my napkin. Wipe thy face.
Give him the wine.
Now set it by. I'll have another bout first. I'll drink anon.
Here, Hamlet, thy mother drinks to thee.
But do not drink, Gertrude. 'Tis the poisoned cup.
Come, Laertes, you dally with me. I pray you, pass with your most cunningst play.
Aye, say you so? Have at you. I'll hit you now, my lord. And yet it goes almost against my conscience.
Come on, sir.
Look to the queen.
Oh, the drink. The drink, Hamlet, the drink!
Treason! Ho!
And so those two scenes, the agency of scene 14 with her scene with Horatio, where she says, I will act, I'll soothe him for a while. I'll make sure he doesn't, suspect anything, because he'll suspect quickly, because he's got a jealous mind. And that little aside in the parenthetical aside, it says so much about her perception of her husband, who now she is convinced killed her first husband and is going to kill her son.
Hamlet, thou hast not in thee half an hour of life. The fatal instrument is in thy hands, unbaited and unvenomed. Thy mother is poisoned. That drink was made for thee.
Poison instrument in my hand. Then venom to thy venom. Die, damned villain! Come, drink. Here lies thy union, here!
Oh, he is justly served. Hamlet, before I die, here, take my hand, and with all my love, I do forgive thee.
And I thee. Oh, I am dead. Horatio, fare thee well.
No, I am more an antique Roman than a Dane. Here's some poison left.
By my love, I charge thee, let it go! Fie, Horatio, and if thou shouldst die, what a scandal wouldst thou leave behind? What tongue should tell the story of our deaths, if not from thee? My heart sinks, Horatio. Mine eyes have lost their sight, my tongue is used. Farewell, Horatio. Heaven receive my soul.
Content yourselves. I'll show to all the ground the first beginning of this tragedy.
Yeah, revision. How long do we have?
I find that when I was a young theater maker, there was nothing I craved more than getting up close to Shakespeare, because there was so much possible in sort of unpacking that box. And I wanted to direct it, and I wanted to dramaturg it, and I wanted to act it, and I wanted to be part of it. And as I moved in my own career towards playwriting, I started to feel like the weight of Shakespeare, but also a fair amount of resentment for how the American theater ecosystem has constructed itself around Shakespeare, that Shakespeare sucks a lot of air out of the play production ecosystem in the United States.
I think that part of what was hard for me about reading Shakespeare in that classroom setting was that there was this idea that everything about it was known and knowable, and I had to unlock the code that was already, I didn't have to unlock the code, but I had to analyze within a framework that already existed. I try to, the way that I try to embrace reading now and teach to my students is that, there's not this sort of master meaning that we're working towards, figuring out. It's just the way that we experience texts as individual and valid.
I never assumed that you were gifted or ordained by the art gods to be able to sit down and do things differently or better all the time than your contemporaries. I mean, there are differences in talent, but I do feel like effort goes a long way. And also too, once things are completed, performed, published, I don't know a writer who's not going to look at it and be like, I wish I could have done this differently. I know I want to make this change in the next printing.
Everything you do on stage is a process of discovery. And every night after you're opened and your play has opened and you're playing it every night or in the afternoon and at night or whatever your run happens to be, theater is that it's that kind of experience where no night is the same.
I can't imagine that it's easy, and even for Shakespeare, I can't imagine that it was easy and it was just a gift from some heavenly place. It just feels too labored over when you look closely at it.
And I think that it would be interesting to be able to see more of, Shakespeare's work as something that was created and, something that was created, revised, written by a person who made deliberate craft choices. I think that was what I was looking for when I was doing, my scene analysis or whatever it was, that paper. I was looking to think about those craft choices and analyze them. Even though I didn't know anything about this person, I knew what I saw on the page and the effects that had on me as a reader.
If you ever see an NBA player play in person and you're a kid, the thought is, first of all, I don't know if I'm ever going to be that tall. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to mechanically, physically do the things that person is doing. But then when you see a practice session, or you see how hard they have to train in order for their coordination to slowly get to the point of pure excellence, it does make you feel like, oh, okay, I have a shot. I have some chance at least advancing toward that. So maybe it is a psychological boost to be like, yeah, Shakespeare was sweating by candlelight, crossing a lot of things out, running drafts by contemporaries or actors that were trusted.
And what I see Shakespeare doing is taking on more difficult challenges as he moves from Q1 to Q2 to F in Hamlet. He's asking his actors to do tougher things. He's asking himself to do tougher things.
If I thought that Shakespeare was somebody who took joy in revising and had like no shame about moving the pieces around, and it would suggest to me somebody who cared above all about the event, cared above all about the audience in lots of ways, because if you're willing to change it and to shift the pieces around, you're not actually worried about the published outcome. You're worried about how well it was working in the theater. And that would give me a little more love for him, and also would be something for me to hang on to when I'm thinking about how often, like when my kid reads Macbeth and how it's approached as a sort of ironclad piece of perfection. That's a lie. And Shakespeare's a reviser uncovers that.
Coleridge, Wordsworth, Shelley, but even Byron. I mean, even poets who kind of project an image of themselves as operating by chance and happenstance, were typically in their more kind of private, cloistered mode, revisers. And I mean, Wordsworth is a famous reviser. You can read, eight or nine different versions of every poem over the 70 or so years he was alive.
The reason that Shakespeare's plays get harder as we go on reading them, and as he goes on writing them later and later in his career, is that he is getting better and better at what he's doing. And he's asking his actors to do tougher and tougher things. It's like watching a football quarterback progress from doing relatively simple things really well to doing wildly complex things really, really well. Why does he do that when he could get away with the easier things? It's the fun of that.
Let 4 of our chiefest captains bear Hamlet like a soldier to his grave. For he was likely, had he lived, to have proved most royal. Take up the body. Such a sight as this becomes the fields, but here doth much amiss.